Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about educating and advocating for the eco-socialist program that we ran on in 2020. And it's been about a month since we didn't have a guest and just took in your comments and questions. And a hell of a lot has changed in the last month. I mean, Trump is moving fast, going after immigrants, the beginning of a really repressive attack on immigrants. He's got Elon Musk out there purging the civil service, massive cuts to social protections and regulatory protections. I mean, there's so much to talk about, but really in the last week, if anybody still had any doubts that Trump was going to align with Putin against Ukraine, he made it clear a week ago Friday. I mean, the two of them want to recolonize Ukraine and carve it up between them. And that reality show staged by Trump and Vance in the Oval Office was a public attempt to publicly shake down Ukraine's President Zelensky. And that should have cleared away any results. The meeting's agenda was Trump's protection racket. He wants to run on Ukraine, basically give us your minerals and agree to Putin's surrender terms, or we're going to hurt you by cutting U.S. military aid to Ukraine. And then he did just that. On Monday, he cut off military aid to Ukraine. On Wednesday, he cut off intelligence sharing. Yesterday, he ordered the Pentagon contractor, Maxar, to deny Ukraine access to satellite images. So Ukraine is now fighting blind, and Trump is getting Ukrainians killed. At least 25 last night, including 6 children, in an attack on civilian apartment buildings. I mean, that's the dictionary definition of terrorism. And not only did they hit the apartment buildings when the first responders showed up, they got a double tap bombing. So they were going after the first responders. And so not only is Ukraine blind to Russian staging operations getting ready to assault on the front line, on the ground battles, they're blind to incoming drones and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles that are targeting Ukrainian cities and civilian infrastructure. More of the energy infrastructure was taken out in the last couple of days. So basically, Trump has switched sides in the Russian war on Ukraine and is now enabling the Russian military. But what has also become clear in the last week is the moral and political bankruptcy of the campus alter imperialists who pose as anti-imperialists. You know, all along they've opposed Ukraine's war of self-defense against Russian aggression on the grounds that a defeat for Ukraine, to which the U.S. imperialist state has given support, some support, too little, too late, too many strings attached, but a defeat for Ukraine would be a defeat for U.S. imperialism, which is absurd. I mean, U.S. imperialism and the military-industrial complex and U.S. militarism have thrived despite losing a whole lot of wars from Vietnam to Iraq. So this is hardly going to be a big dent in U.S. imperialism if Ukraine is conquered by Russia. But now that U.S. imperialism under Trump supports Russia's war on Ukraine as clearly as it supports Israel's war on Palestine, one would think that the campus would reconsider their position and oppose U.S. imperialism's assault on Ukraine. But no, many campuses are doubling down on opposing Ukraine. One of the most egregious examples, I think, was Code Pink's Medea Benjamin, who declared on a video posted within a couple hours of that Oval Office beatdown of Zelensky by Trump and Vance. And she said, quote, "Trump is right." You know, she's basically saying the same thing that the campus have been saying all along. Stop arms to Ukraine, have a ceasefire, and negotiate, a peace settlement. Of course, there's no indication that Russia's going to stop bombing the hell out of Ukraine and attacking the front lines just because Ukraine is disarmed. In fact, just the opposite. In fact, Trump said yesterday he would do the same thing, or anyone would do the same thing now that he's cut off intelligence and military supplies to Ukraine, and Putin has escalated the attacks. But this is bigger than Ukraine. What we've witnessed in the last few weeks from Trump and his minions is about much more than Ukraine. We've witnessed an attempt to fundamentally alter the geopolitical arrangements in the world, realign the United States to support a new reactionary world order in alliance with Vladimir Putin. It's a shift away from the nominal commitment to human rights and conflict resolution principles that are in international law embodied in the UN Charter and the UN Declaration of Human Rights since World War II. It's a shift toward what Putin calls a multipolar world, which is a multi-imperialist world, in his view, where the big power empires dominate the world in their own spheres of influence, and the smaller oppressed nations are to be compelled to submit to their imperialist exploiters. It's an amoral world in which might makes right, instead of a world, which has been a good idea, honored in the breach of moral principles enshrined in international law, that is supposed to apply equally to all nations. That's what the left should be, supporting. And that's why we have opposed, U.S. imperialism and aggression in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and other places. But so, the U.S. has violated these human rights, but now it doesn't even pretend under Trump to believe in these human rights and international law. It's realigned itself away from the democratic nations that still, support international law, and towards the reactionary right-wing authoritarians like Putin. And now there's a perverse logic to Trump's geopolitical realignment. He has goals and Putin has goals. And together they aim to divide Europe and impose authoritarianism, austerity on working people, and a reactionary, racist, anti-immigrant, anti-feminist, anti-LGBTQ social policies in their respective spheres of influence. In Ukraine, what that means is genocidal policies toward the Ukrainian people in the east under Russian occupation, forced Russification. If you don't, get a Russian passport, your kids can't go to school, you can't get any social services. And if you resist it all, you're going to be imprisoned, tortured maybe, executed maybe, your children sent to Russia. I mean, that is genocide. And it's, occupation is not peace, although the campists think you get a ceasefire and call that peace when people are being, violently abused. And in the west of Ukraine, under Trump's neo-colonial domination, it means exploitation, exploitative resource extraction, cheap labor, neoliberal austerity, and bigoted social policies. And in Europe, and this is part of the target too, it means both the US and Russia are helping the authoritarian far right take power, supporting right-wing parties like the AfD in Germany, National Rally in France, Reform in the UK, and other parties in the smaller countries. And what this all means, their goal is to smash real political democracy and crush the remnants of social democratic, economic, and social protections. This Putin-Trump pact is like the Stalin-Hitler pact of non-aggression in 1939. Of course, immediately after which, Stalin and Hitler divided up Poland between them, invaded, and each took their share. But this Trump-Putin pact also has its contradictions, just like the Stalin-Hitler pact did, which led to World War II. The Trump agenda is to form a U.S.-Russia alliance against China, which they see as its main competitor. And the Putin agenda is to restore Russia to the borders of the former Tsarist and Soviet empires. But I don't think Putin's going to get his way, because Russia values its alliance with China much more than the U.S., particularly because they don't see the U.S. as, a reliable partner, because Trumpism, is not likely to stay in power. There's going to be a big popular reaction to what Trump is doing, because what he's doing is not supported by the majority of Americans. But in the meantime, Russia will attempt to maximize its imperial territorial gains. And that's while Trump is in power. And Georgia and Moldova are probably next on the victims list if Ukraine is conquered. So Europe, now they see, we got a security threat from this Moscow-Washington alliance. So it is beginning to take the steps to rapidly remilitarize. But under the neoliberal capitalist rule that predominates in Europe, it's going to be paid for with more austerity, cuts to climate action, and accommodation to the far-right xenophobic immigration policies. Now, they'll use the defense of Ukraine as a pretext for this militarization. But when it comes to Ukraine getting the weapons they need, it's been from Europe, like the United States, too little, too late, with too many strings attached. So they're going to produce weapons, but it's going to be for Europe to become a major power. They've even, dropped the balanced budgets dogma that has dominated EU fiscal policy. Now, under the existing capitalist power structure of the EU, they hope it will make them a fourth major power, along with the US and China, and a much less powerful Russia. But under the existing neoliberal power structure in the EU, they're going to pay for remilitarization with austerity. And that's only going to feed the resentments of the far right, which exploits those resentments to fuel their rise to power. And both Trump and Putin, far more than, direct military conquest, they're counting on the far right in Europe to come to power and join their alliance of neo-fascist autocracies. The EU itself is a non-democratic institution. It's controlled by the big capitalist interests in Europe. So it's largely, although not completely, impervious to popular resistance. So, what can we do as green socialists to defeat this neo-fascist Trump-Putin alliance and the rise of the far right? We've got to unite across borders for an international mass mobilization that unites our social movements, our unions, and our parties of the democratic left. And that has to be around a program that's socialist, to promote a democratic, egalitarian, and ecological world. And we can do that, small as we are in each of our countries. We can begin building those relationships and participating in these mobilizations. And we can raise demands. We need to raise popular economic demands, to raise wages, rebuild the public sector, and eliminate poverty with what we've been calling for: an economic bill of rights to jobs, income, housing, healthcare, childcare, elder care, education, and a secure retirement. These are popular programs. We need to keep insisting on the social demands that protect oppressed groups and overcome bigotry that divides the working class majority. And we need to, really get an emphasis on progressive taxation of the rich to finance economic rights and protections, and also finance a Green New Deal energy transition that eliminates fossil fuels without, trying to build more nuclear power plants. We need to phase them out. Another demand is we need to end the neo-colonial plunder of the global South, starting with the cancellation of unjust and illegitimate debts. And then, to make this possible, we got to take the power from the capitalists, which means socializing finance, energy, the arms industry, and other key sectors, so we can democratically plan the provision of economic rights and the complicated energy transition we need to make to protect the climate. Now, as small and poorly organized as the eco-socialist left is in the US, we can still speak up and make the connections across borders to our counterparts in Europe and around the world. But, we need to get stronger. So to build that, and I've been talking about this every chance I get on this podcast and elsewhere. We got to build from below. We are not strong enough to influence national politics now. It won't. A strong left isn't going to come out of a presidential campaign or out of conferences of people who don't represent anybody but themselves. We got to build this movement at the base. That requires building independent progressive parties in our communities, green parties, new radical parties, something that challenges the two-party system of corporate rule. And the point here is to build a real base. When we organize a base, then we can come together nationally and have something that can influence national politics. And another point I've been emphasizing is these grassroots parties need to be active in movement politics as much as electoral politics to build real working alliances with the social movements, the unions, and connections of them to the parties at the grassroots level. And it's on that foundation of strong local parties that elect thousands to local office in the coming period under the Trump administration that we can then begin to run competitive and winning candidates for state legislatures and the House of Representatives. And when we get a caucus in the House, the left will have real leverage on national policy. And that's really the goal of what we should be building toward. So I'm saying that in this emerging reactionary world order, we have been thrust into by the Trump administration, we need to focus our efforts now on serious local organizing and then build up our influence from there, from below, and organize a real base so that as we come out of this Trump administration, we have a real alternative to give to the American people. So those are my thoughts. I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. And let's see if we can get our heads around what's happened in the last month, particularly the last week. Scout Trooper 164. I have a feeling that Trump's confidence is going to last long. The American people aren't going to, his confidence is going to last long. The American people aren't going to just stand down if he takes away funding for schools and the like. Nobody likes a bully. I think you mean his confidence is not going to stand. Yeah. Okay. Isn't going to last long. That's what I thought you were trying to say. Why in the world should we go back to the 1800s? Do people really think that was a great time for everyone? Yeah, I think you're expressing, Scout Trooper, what a lot of people are feeling. And, these demonstrations against Trump, the 50501 demonstrations, and others are, beginning to mobilize. And it's pretty impressive considering that, somebody just put it out online and people responded. I think, Trump basically has 2 years till the midterms to get his damage done. And, the courts, I've talked about this, the courts are, putting roadblocks in his way. The question is he going to ignore the courts? And then we got a real constitutional crisis. So there's going to be a lot happening. So I think, that rebellion is coming and we got to be in the middle of it. If we're going to, make the case that we need an alternative party that really offers an alternative. The Democrats, as I've said, they're congenitally neoliberal. They're funded by, billionaires, and their, organizational apparatus is peopled by the professional upper middle class, which doesn't want to pay taxes for redistributive economic rights programs. They're liberal compared to the Republicans on social issues, but on economic issues, they don't care about working people. And so there's a huge vacuum we can fill, but we can't fill it if we're not organized and have a real base. This isn't going to be done by giving a good speech at a conference or online. Lee Shoron, what's your intake on the what's your take, I think, on the Republicans introducing a bill to help run for a third term and not Obama? Does the bill explicitly say Obama can't run again? I'm not aware of the bill details, but I know they're talking about it. I think Trump definitely wants to do that. He wants to be president for life. And I don't know if the Republicans are going to go along with that one. That requires a constitutional amendment. That means you got to get it ratified in 2/3 of the states. That's a tough lift, even for a Republican Party that is just cravenly, bowing down before Trump. So I think I don't think we have to worry about that one too much. We got more immediate problems to deal with. Scout Trooper 164. With the way Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries aren't doing shit, could this be a massive benefit for the Greens as the grassroots are getting fed up with the Dems? Yeah, I mean, they're leaving that vacuum unfilled. I don't think they're structurally capable of filling it. And they're doing a poor job of even bluffing, like they are being in opposition. They're not saying the right things. They're not, really dissenting for what Trump is doing in a loud, visible way and mobilizing opposition to Trump. So not only, I don't think the Democrats are capable of doing it, but they're not even now with these leaders capable of talking the talk, even if they don't walk the walk. Their members are joining to censure their own members for voicing opposition. Yeah, Al Green got censured, and 10 of the Democrats joined in the Republican resolution, and that's just pathetic. The guy, made his point. He got escorted out of the chamber. What he was saying is, you don't have a mandate to cut Medicaid, and so he made his point. But to censure him for that, I mean, the Republicans have done a lot worse heckling, Obama and Biden when they were giving State of the Union addresses. And, nobody tried to censure them. Everybody, with any common sense kind of ridiculed them, but censure, going through a formal censure process is ridiculous. And, the 10 Democrats joined the Republicans is just indicative of the Democrats. They don't know how to fight the fascists. They want to accommodate them, compromise with them, do bipartisanship, as Biden tried to do with the party that tried to overthrow his election. That's not how you deal with fascists. You don't compromise with them and work with them. You defeat them politically. And you do that by ridiculing their stupid stuff and fighting them every step of the way. And, Al Green did the right thing. He made his point, and that's, what he could do in that situation, and I'm glad he did. Joanna Munley. Trump's treatment of Zelensky, U.S. allies, the press, and even cabinet members is repugnant. How long do you think it will take for cabinet members to step down? Well, any step down as they did in Trump 45, the first Trump administration. I think Trump wasn't ready for his first administration. He really didn't think he would win. He was doing a branding exercise. He didn't think he could beat Hillary Clinton. And she ran such a terrible campaign that he did. But he didn't have, like he did this time, thousands of people lined up to fill the positions in the executive branch, a playbook like Project 2025. There's been a cadre of far-right activists who have been preparing for this, and now they're ready. And the people they brought into the cabinet are people that are totally spineless. I think of Marco Rubio, who was so, insulted and ridiculed by Trump when he ran against him in 2016. The man's got no pride. And now he's just doing whatever he has to do to be the Secretary of State. And I don't see him stepping down. I can't think of any of them that are going to step down because Trump wouldn't have appointed him. And more importantly, the technical people, the expertise around Trump, pick these people for their craven loyalty. So I don't see the descent to Trump coming from within his administration. It's got to come from without. Trump did everything he could to prove that he was not qualified for the job. Yeah, I mean, he's been doing that for the last, what is it now? He started in 2015. It's been 10 years. Yeah, that's a sad commentary on American politics. The state of where the voters are at in terms of understanding who Trump is. The guy's run cons his whole life, and people are still falling for them, and that's sad. Plus, the mass media and the Democratic Party have helped normalize Trump by treating him as if he was a normal politician when he's a fucking fascist. And now we're beginning to see what that really means. So the thing I was thinking of is, I think the one guy he won't quit Trump. Trump will quit him, and that's Elon Musk, because Musk is a bull in a china shop, and he's getting too much attention because Trump wants all the attention. So I think that's one guy that may depart from the Trump inner circle just because of the clash of egos. And Trump, doesn't want anybody shading his spotlight. But it won't be because Musk disagrees with Trump's basic program. Via email, thoughts on the tariffs and the growing trade war. Well, economically, they're dumb. They're going to hurt the economy. But as many commentators have said this week, maybe that's the goal, because if we go into a depression, assets will be cheap and the super rich will be able to buy up more of them. And so maybe there's a method to Trump's madness on tariffs. The way to respond to tariffs is to, build solidarity across borders, particularly among unions, and not fall into protectionism. Like the UAW. I haven't seen the statement, but I've heard UAW activists not happy with the UAW statement responding to the tariffs, and I guess it was protectionist, and that's dumb because they got members on both sides of the border. They should have, Canadian border, and also they should have them in Mexico. There should be a real international union to deal with these global car companies. Tariffs is not the best way to protect jobs. We need a job guarantee, so anybody who can't find work in the private sector can get a public job doing socially useful work. We need to, fight these big companies with job actions and strike actions across the borders. And that's our best way to deal with, the loss of jobs due to manufacturing and other industries moving across borders. Trade war doesn't help working people anywhere. And the rich, may want to try to take advantage of it. Those that aren't immediately hurt by it, by buying up assets that become much cheaper because the economy goes into the hole. Any thoughts on Tim Walz considering running for president, if he can be allowed? I'm not sure what you mean by if he can be allowed. He's certainly a U.S. citizen. He's old enough. I guess who's going to stop him except, Democratic Party power structure. I don't really care who the Democrats run. I think, we got to focus on our own work. And whoever the Democrats come up with, you can be assured it's not going to be a Bernie Sanders type social democrat. It's going to be a neoliberal. And Walz gives, and has as governor been more on the progressive side on economic issues. But, in this last campaign, maybe he was muzzled, but, he didn't take on, he didn't speak up for the working people of this country, as Harris certainly didn't. And then Trump was able to get some of their votes because he basically said, I feel your pain and I'm going to fix it. But, he had signs saying Trump will fix it at his rallies, but he didn't say how, and he's not going to. So I'm kind of indifferent to Walt's running. He can do what he wants, but I'm going to focus on what we need to do in building a real alternative. Scout Trooper 164. I meant if he can be allowed, because I don't know if Trump will try to terminate the Constitution and make himself king. Trump wants to be king, but he says stuff and doesn't do them. I think the Republican Trump plan is to continue to purge the voter rolls of people that are not likely to vote for him, particularly Black people, young people around colleges, anybody they think, might vote not for Trump. So the voter suppression, Greg Palast, look his article on over 3 million people he's accounted for in his research that wanted to vote in 2024 and weren't allowed to because their names have been purged from the voter rolls and other, tricks. And, they are from constituencies, particularly African Americans, who likely would have voted for the Democrat. So I think that's the Republicans' strategy, is to, have managed democracy, as they used to call Putin's Russia before it really got so repressive. You can't even call it a democracy, and the elections are so phony. They're going to try to keep the facade of elections because that makes them legitimate in the popular mind. So I don't think he's going to change the Constitution that way. That would be too obvious. And, American people, even people that voted for him, are not going to stand for that. I think we're not. The American people are much more progressive than even the Democratic Party when it comes to economic issues, social issues, and they value their democratic rights. So I just don't see that happening. What they're going to do is, behind the scenes, make it harder for people to vote, those people who would not vote for Trump. I think that's their game plan. I think that Greg Palast article, Trump lost, voter suppression won. Here are the numbers. Look that up. And Josh Schaufele, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, voter suppression in state government is concerning across the U.S. Particularly in the Republican states, although the Democratic states, there I think it's more a matter of not fully funding and insisting on integrity with their electoral systems. I know here in New York, particularly New York City, which has its own election board independent of the state board, has had a lot of problems. The most famous example people listening would probably remember is when Bernie Sanders was, I think it was 2016, was running, and tens of thousands of Democrats in Brooklyn, which is where Sanders was born, found out they couldn't vote in that primary. They were purged from the rolls, and they weren't supposed to be. So that kind of just incompetence because of underfunding. I know in my own county board of elections, they had a hell of a time getting all the people who registered in time onto the voter roll so they could vote on election day. And they barely did it, but only because the state brought in extra workers to help them get it done at the last minute. So they had a little crisis there. So I think, in the Republican states, they're, passing legislation and administering election laws to suppress the vote. But in a lot of the Democratic states, they're not taking the integrity and the you know the competence of the election system seriously enough to fully fund and staff it. That's also a concern. Lee Showron, the Republican Party should get somebody better. Hopefully, it's not J.D. Vance or Musk. We need somebody like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Republican side. Too bad he can't run for president. I don't know if the Republican Party today can elevate anybody that's a traditional conservative Republican or even a moderate Republican. It's that party has changed, and under Trump's leadership, it has become a neo-fascist party, and its base is with him. At least, I would say 2/3 of the base. They are the remnants of the old, white racist Dixiecrats. A lot of them went over to the Republicans when civil rights began to be passed. It's an old trend in American politics. I think it's diminishing and dying out, but it's still maybe 1/3 of the electorate. That's the base, and that base now feels like it can really push its racist agenda since Trump came onto the scene, and they've taken over the Republican Party. So the moderates, even pretty conservative people like Liz Cheney, they're not welcome in the Republican Party, and they're talking about forming another kind of traditional conservative party. I don't know if that's going to happen. If it did, it would, I think, split the Republican base. The other 1/3 of the Republican base, I think, are basically, upscale country club Republicans who they may not like Trump. They may think he's crude, ignorant, and so forth, like most people. But they like the tax cuts. They don't want to pay taxes for, social protections that the government provides. They'd rather, keep their money so they can spend it for themselves, on themselves. And I think, there's all that, that's a class-based conservative position that the Republicans have now. A new conservative party might be able to capture some of that and split the Republicans. But I'll believe that when I see it, because, the Never Trump Republicans, they talked a lot, but they didn't show up in elections. And a lot of them ended up, supporting the Democrats, who they felt pretty comfortable with, at least in terms of economic policy, for sure. And also foreign policy, as it was articulated by Biden and Harris. So I think, more likely than a new conservative party is those people will go into the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party will welcome them. And so the party will have its progressive tail, the AOCs and the Bernie Sanders, but it's always had that. Even when the party turned from being a New Deal party, kind of a mild social democratic party, from the 30s until the early 70s. In the 70s, when they turned to the right and embraced neoliberalism, they still had about as many, real progressives like they have now. They were concentrated in the Black Caucus. People like Ron Dellums and John Conyers, and I'm trying to remember the names right now. Guys in Chicago and New York City. They were the Black Caucus was much more progressive than it is now as a whole, and they were putting good policies forward. Full employment, job guarantee we call it today. How expanding public housing to house, make sure everybody had affordable housing. Those kinds of legislation, and Medicare for all, but really what they came up with was a national health service, which would socialize not just the insurance, the payment system, the single payer system. It would socialize the whole system and make it democratic. All that came from the Black Caucus. In fact, they were to the left of, what we're getting in legislation today from, the Squad and the left wing of the Democratic Party. So um, the party's going to welcome in these uh, wayward Republicans and allow the progressives to be out there to make the Democrats look better to progressive voters than they really are. So I don't think the Republican Party isn't going to moderate, and the Democratic Party is probably going to absorb some of those rational Republicans, as conservative as they are. Scout Trooper 164. Someone that I've been watching that's critical of Trump says he might be showing signs of dementia. Don't know if that's true, but if he is, that will put some hypocrisy and strain on things. Yeah, I was slow to recognize how Biden was declining. I'll admit that. I thought, the criticism of him being, not all there. I was more concerned with what was there. And I think even though Biden was declining, he still was behind the policies that were coming out of his administration. But I was awoke when he got in that debate with Trump and couldn't even finish his sentences. And people say the same thing about Trump, saying he shows signs of dementia. He can't complete sentences. He always talked at a 6th grade level, even 10 years ago. So I don't know if he's showing signs of dementia. I see signs of sociopathy. He doesn't care about anybody but himself. Just take, he pulled away the intelligence sharing with Ukraine this week. So they can't see these attacks coming. And last night, as I said, they hit residential buildings in Donetsk, killing 26 people, including 6 children. And they're still digging through the rubble. Did a double tap strike on the first responders at those residential buildings. And Trump, he isn't moved. He doesn't care. And the same thing for Gaza. He's basically going to let Netanyahu go back in there and start killing again if, Hamas doesn't agree to his demands on releasing hostages. And though Hamas wants the aid to be coming in, which has been blocked, and Trump doesn't care. He doesn't care if the Gazans starve. He doesn't care if the Ukrainians are blown up. He's cold. And so I think that's a bigger issue than any dementia he's got. And even if he's got it, he's got all these, sharp young neo-fascists around him in the administration. And they can carry things out and, trot Trump out there to do his shtick. And but they'll get it done, even if he's not completely aware of what's going on. So I don't think his dementia is the big issue. I think it's his policies and what he's gathered around him in terms of a force that's much more competent and energetic than it was in his first administration in implementing these far-right policies. Vicky Corden, it's time to get rid of the electoral college and the two-party system, just to avoid a similar hell we are living now. Yeah, the electoral college. There's another one. The Democrats, when Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court gave the presidency to George W. Bush and stopped the count in Florida, a lot of Democrats came out and said, oh, we got to get rid of the electoral college because, Gore won the popular vote. Gore won the popular vote, but Bush got elected. And Hillary Clinton, the first news conference she did after being elected to the Senate from New York, the first time that year, was do a press conference here in New York saying she was going to introduce a bill to get rid of the electoral college. And then she didn't. And the senator from Illinois, blanking on his name right now, he had a bill in the previous session, and he said he'd reintroduce it after that, Bush election. Dick Durbin, that's right. And he had a bill, and then he didn't reintroduce it that session. I mean, the Democrats, they give lip service to that when it seems like it'll get them a soundbite in the news cycle, and then they don't do anything about it. So Yeah, the Greens got to pick that one up along with the other pro-democracy reforms, particularly ranked choice voting and proportional representation. That's how we open up the two-party system into a multi-party system, because ranked choice voting takes away the spoiler problem that compels so many people to vote for the lesser evil Democrats to stop the greater evil Republicans, and proportional representation, which you can do in a ranked choice vote in multi-seat districts for legislative bodies, would give every party its fair and representative share of power and representation. Those are things the Greens have led on. Ranked choice voting got it started in San Francisco and Oakland in the early 2000s. We now have it in over 51 jurisdictions. And we need to keep being at the center of that movement, particularly because some of the funded groups in that movement are not pushing for proportional ranked choice voting. They'll just settle for ranked choice voting from single member districts, which takes away the spoiler problem, but doesn't create a multi-party system. And we need a multi-party system like most countries in the world have, because they have proportional systems. That is one of the key demands we got to keep pushing. And if we follow my recommendation, okay, there's an article that Chris published or posted in the chat about 7 pro-democracy reforms I wrote about a few years ago. We need to push proportional representation, ranked choice voting at the municipal level, where we can get into power now. Greens have demonstrated that over the years. We've elected over 1,500. We've won over 1,500 elections. We have 150 to 170. I forget what the count is right now. Local elected officials. We can turn that into thousands, and we can win these reforms at the municipal level and then bring them up to the state level and eventually the federal level. And when I say eventually, I hope it's fast, because even if, Trump is out of office and Trumpism's out of office in 2 years after the midterms, and particularly 4 years, the climate isn't waiting for us. And now, the emissions are going up. We're living in an insane time. So we got to build from below, but build fast, with urgency. Lee Showron, the Senate and the House should have term limits too. If you have a proportional system, then it's up to the parties to term limit their own candidates. There's an argument for term limits, and, you get fresh blood in. On the other hand, if you don't have experienced legislators, then the corporate lobbyists, the bureaucrats in the government can bamboozle people that just aren't familiar and experienced. So that's a double-edged sword. I think a better way to deal with that is to have proportional representation and let the parties then, replace their representatives based on merit and, age and things like that. Via email, your response to the TSA workers union losing recognition and commentary on the broader implications of the current situation for federal workers and their unions. This is a full-out assault on federal workers, and not just firing a lot of them, but busting their unions. And, those of us in other unions need to make sure our unions, or push our unions to work and show up in solidarity with the federal workers. We need to speak out every opportunity we have to talk about, what these workers provide to us in services. And it's a huge issue, and there's going to be a big pushback, and we need to be part of it. And the TSA workers, that was where Reagan, started the assault on unions in the 1980s. Although the truth is, it began under Carter, because the plan to bust the union was written up by Carter administration officials. So this has been a bipartisan assault on working people. And, we got to fight back through our unions, independent of the Democratic Party. We can't count on them, let alone the Republican Party. Josh Shalfele. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, or Shafil. Uh, Thoughts on BlackRock buying two ports in the Panama Canal? Um, yeah, I've seen a little bit about that, and I guess they've been encouraged uh, to replace Chinese ownership of ports. But my understanding is that it didn't matter who owned the ports; everybody wanted the ships to go through and do business and make money. So I think it's more symbolic than substantive. Um, there's no evidence that the Chinese ownership of port facilities was obstructing trade in any way. And maybe Trump, by talking up, Chinese ownership, just kind of opened the door, and the Chinese felt they better sell now when they could get a good price, and BlackRock could, pick it up, than wait for more problems from Trump. They probably said we can make money other ways and not deal with Trump's craziness. Lee Shomron, it was ridiculous that Trump cut funding for transgenic mice. He thinks it's transgender mice. It would have helped. It would have helped. He's just not that very bright. I didn't know that, but that's funny. There was another thing I was reading today about, the things they're banning in the Pentagon under Hegseth that relate to DEI. So they're eliminating reference to the Enola Gay, which is the B-29 bomber that dropped the bomb in atomic bomb in the first atomic bomb in Japan in 1945, because it has the word gay in it. Now, it was the name of the mother of the lead pilot in that plane, whose name was Enola Gay. That was her first two names, and she had a last name. It has nothing to do with gay. But, this is just how irrational and stupid and not very bright, like you say, these people are. It's just silly. But that's what they're doing. It's, and what we hear from federal employees, they don't know whether they're coming or going, and they're getting all these ridiculous, instructions from above. One of the things that concerns me most is that a lot of the people who are, mid-level people in power, university presidents, the head of media companies, the editorial boards, they're all caving into Trump. And very few are resisting. New York Times had an article about this yesterday. And that's concerning because these people are opinion leaders. And if they're afraid, then ordinary people are going to, kind of run and duck for cover. And it will suppress the dissent that people are feeling, but now they're getting scared to express it. And so we got to, give a hard time, to anybody that, we have any ties or influence on to, stop cowing down to the bullies in Washington that are now trying to, silence them. It's creating a climate, like during the McCarthy era where people, they were nominally going after communists, but they're really going after liberals. And they scared a lot of liberals into silence. And it took a while to come out of that. There seems to be a control plus F use, searching for keywords, that is causing them to target things that have nothing to do with what they think. Yeah, it's something, idiotic like that. It's just irrational. It's the kind of thing, you'd expect somebody in junior high school to do. It's, but they got people almost that young running around the federal bureaucracy, getting into the databases, the financial systems, and some of them, have been exposed as being, little neo-Nazi racists. Like this guy who had his online name Big Balls. I mean, these are just juvenile ridiculous people who happen to love, the neo-Nazi racism of people like these tech bros, Elon Musk and David Sachs and Peter Thiel, who unfortunately have a lot of money and power as a result. People are putting gay in the chat, but they're putting an E at the end of GAY. And Enola Gay, that plane it's just GAY. So it must be gay. The way they're thinking, oh man, this is hard to believe it's happening. Josh Chapelet, thoughts on BRICS Plus adding more countries in the last few months. BRICS has so many internal contradictions, conflicts between these countries. I don't think it's, they're aspiring to be a power bloc against the Western bloc, but I don't see it happening. They've been talking about a new currency for years, and but the fact is, and China's the biggest country in there. China is fully participating in neoliberal administration of the world economy through the IMF and the World Bank. They don't want to change it. They don't like Trump's tariffs. So I just don't see BRICS being much more than a talk shop at this point. If you really want to read a good critique, you should look up two South African radical political economists, Patrick Bond and Trevor Nangwali. And they sometimes write together. They have written a lot. They have a group called Bricks from Below, which has a lot of good, very substantive criticism of BRICS. As basically, BRICS is not an alternative to Western imperialism. It's a group of people that want to move up the ladder in the global hierarchy of global imperialism in the capitalist system. So they're not an alternative. They're just a rival within the system. There's the Bricks from Below link in the chat. Check that out. Nameless name. Hey, Howie Hawkins, what do you think of Rudolph Ware running for governor in California? I think his program, that I've been reading his fundraising mailings, very good stuff. Very the kind of programs we can run on at the state level. And my only concern is, and Butch has got, he ran for vice president, so maybe running for governor and leading, the Greens in California is the right move for him. Definitely the program, I really like it, whether it's dealing with housing or the prisons or a whole host of issues. Are the Greens in California organizing at the local level, running local candidates, or even candidates for state assembly? So, I wish Butch the best, and, people should check out his website. I haven't seen it, but I've been reading his fundraising mailings, but his website, I'm told, now has a lot of the programmatic ideas up. So, check it out and throw a few dollars his way if you can. Okay, I guess our hour is up. Next week, we're going to go back to having a guest. It's Arthur Pai from the Rojava Information Center. And if you haven't been following what's going on in that part of Syria, the Kurdish region, they're in big trouble. Turkey is attacking them. Turkey backed one of the forces that, along with HTS, which took power in Damascus, has been attacking the Kurds. And these are Islamist, very right-wing militias. And the Kurds have had a saying, they have no friends but the mountains. Right now, the U.S. has, they say now, 1,000 troops embedded with them to fight ISIS, where U.S. provided logistical support, but the Kurdish militia, including, women's militias, were the ones that did the on-the-ground battle and defeated ISIS. And Trump in 2019 tried to pull out of Rojava, that's northeast Syria. And the military kind of slow walked that. He did it in 2019, and by the time he left in 2020, the military was still there. But what's he going to do now? I've been looking. I haven't seen an indication, but Arthur Pai has been there in Rojava. He's documented the grassroots revolution, its feminist, ecological, socialist aspects. Another change is that the leader of the Kurdish left-wing nationalist movement, which has become now more a movement for a grassroots democracy from below, modeled in great deal after the ideas of Murray Bookchin. He's now called for the Kurdish forces that are armed to put down their arms and participate in the democratic process. His name is Öcalan, and he says that it's possible now in Turkey, and hopefully it will be possible in Syria. So anyway, there's a lot to talk about and a lot of consequences for this, and again, a smaller oppressed nation that the big powers have kicked around for a long time. And the question is whether the U.S. is going to kick them to the curb this time. So anyway, we'll get an update on what's going on with that situation. And meanwhile, like I've been saying, everybody needs to be in a group. You're much more effective and get much smarter if you're, kicking ideas around in a group and, resisting Trump and hopefully building a local Green Party or any kind of left-wing radical party in your local community. Until we have those in enough communities, presidential campaigns and conventions of people who don't represent anybody don't amount to much. I said that at the beginning, and I guess I'll close on that note. We gotta be organizing in our communities and building a real alternative. So I hope everybody stays active, keep your hope up. Things do change. I've been through a lot of movements where we were a small minority and suddenly we broke through. Anti-Vietnam, anti-nuclear movement. We stopped fracking in New York. There are a lot of examples I could give you. So, we'll just keep agitating and organizing, and we will move forward. So, have a good week, everybody, and we'll see you next week.